Hello, I'm Yalda Hakim. Our top story on Impact today, a crucial summit for a divided Europe. EU leaders meet in Brussels to discuss a range of issues from migration to Brexit.
I'm Christian Fraser, live in Brussels. I'll bring you all the latest. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, says the stakes at this summit are high.
Europe faces a lot of challenges, but the migration could be a question of destiny for the European Union.
Also on the programme, bad weather is hampering the search for 12 boys trapped in a cave in Thailand as US and British experts arrive to help. And scientists find a new technique to help catch people who poach pangolins, the world's most trafficked animal. That's all coming up here on Impact. Welcome. Migration is top of the political agenda for EU leaders meeting in Brussels. Over the last few weeks, more migrants, rescue boats and their mainly African passengers have been barred from entry to Italian ports. Frontline countries like Italy want others to take a greater share of migrants. States like Austria are pushing back. This is not a crisis on the scale of 2015, when thousands of migrants were coming ashore every day on the Greek islands. In the years since then, the numbers have been coming down. So far this year, there's been a total of around 44,000 arrivals. But many leaders are sounding alarm bells about the urgent need to find a better way to deal with the people still risking their lives to cross the Mediterranean. Germany's Angela Merkel says the migration question could decide the future of the EU. Well, let's go straight now to Brussels and speak to my colleague Christian Fraser. Christian, over to you.
Yalda, thank you very much. Yes, the leaders just beginning to arrive here in Brussels for what could prove to be the most difficult summit they've had in many a year. They are, as you rightly say, dealing with this fraught issue of migration. The summit, in fact, was supposed to be dealing with Brexit and the concrete measures that were supposed to have been put in place. But of course, there's been very little progress, and it has been superseded by this row over migration. And it's been rumbling for months. It's fair to say that there has been some progress in some areas. So in terms of strengthening the borders of Europe, there is widespread agreement that they're going to have to bulk up the border agency, Frontex, the Border and Coast Guard Agency, quite substantially, in fact. There'll be around 10,000 border guards patrolling the Mediterranean Sea and marshalling Europe's border. There's also going to be a better way of processing migrants in terms of fingerprinting. There'll be a European agency responsible for processing asylum seekers. But the big sticking point is allocation. What Italy wants to break is that link between where the asylum seekers land and the responsibility that that country then has for processing them, particularly given that other European countries are not taking their fair share of the quota which have been allocated to them by the European Union. Now, you're right to say that the numbers coming across the Mediterranean this year have fallen quite substantially, 44,000 compared to around 2.5 million in 2015 and 16. But what has changed, of course, is voter sentiment in Europe, and politics in Italy and in Austria, for instance, has been hardening. Austria has the rotating presidency of the European Union next month. And of course, the Italians have been pushing quite a hard bargain in this migration debate. So let's go first to Rome to hear from James Reynolds, our correspondent in Rome, and then we'll hear from Bethany Bell, who is in Vienna.
Italy's got two main aims at the summit. The first is to get the rest of the EU to agree to share out migrants more equally to take the pressure off frontline states like Italy. But this idea is likely to meet resistance from states in Central and Eastern Europe. And Italy's second main aim is to get support for its plan to stop migration across the Mediterranean altogether. It plans to do this by helping to build migration holding centres on the external borders of Libya. There are a number of questions about this, but Italy's Interior Minister Matteo Salvini has told the BBC that he doesn't expect any objections from Europe. We'll see.
Austria's government, a coalition of the Conservatives and the far right, says the migrant crisis of 2015 mustn't happen again. Austria's leader, Sebastian Kurz of the Conservatives, says he's making the fight against illegal migration one of the priorities for Austria's upcoming EU presidency. And he's taking a tough line. He wants to shift the focus from relocating asylum seekers inside the EU to strengthening the EU's outer borders. He wants to set up asylum centres outside the EU and to give the EU's border agency a tougher mandate. During the migrant crisis of 2015 and 16, Austria took in about 1% of its population. But these days, asylum applications have dropped dramatically.
Yes, unanimous support for these processing centres outside Europe, what they call disembarkation platforms. But I can tell you, not much agreement from the North African countries. Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, some of the countries that they've identified. None of the governments in these countries are very keen on hosting thousands of migrants. Libya, for instance, is in such a state of flux at the moment that you sort of wonder how would they be able to process migrants on their southern border in the southern deserts where there are very precious few resources. And of course, militias in Libya have already given the migrants quite a tough time when they get to Tripoli. So there wouldn't be much confidence that Libya could deal with them. Morocco and Tunisia are not very keen for political reasons either. So it's certainly an issue that will be discussed here, but there's an awful long way to go until that can be resolved. Raising the stakes here is, of course, the domestic row in Germany. Angela Merkel, so often the Queen of Europe, to whom everybody looks, comes here really under severe pressure because her sister party in Germany, the CSU, is saying that on Sunday, unless there is an agreement on what they call secondary migration, so asylum seekers moving from one country into another, unless they can find some way to stop that, then the Interior Minister of the CSU says he's going to close the border, and that would be threatening to the stability of the German coalition. Well, before she set off, Angela Merkel did speak to MPs in Berlin. Let's just have a listen to what she had to say.
Europe faces a lot of challenges, but the migration could be a question of destiny for the European Union. Either we manage it in a way that Africa and other countries believe that we are led by values and that we are based on multilateralism and not on unilateralism, or nobody will believe in our value system that has made us so strong. And this is why all this is at stake.
Angela Merkel speaking a little earlier. Well, with me is David Hersenhorn. He's the Brussels correspondent for Politico. She says it's a defining moment, part of Europe's destiny, this debate. Is it really an existential threat to the Union?
Well, there's no question that if this gets out of hand, the EU's common travel area, the Schengen area, is at risk. And that, of course, is at the core of the single market. And the UK now is well aware of freedom of movement and how crucial that is to the EU. At the same time, we know this is not a crisis. It's not 2015. The numbers are way down. We do think a lot of this is an internal political brouhaha in Germany, and she seems to be managing that. But yes, at the core, of course, is a fundamental question about the survival of the EU's common travel area and, of course, international law and a principle of welcoming refugees, asylum seekers who maybe are seeking protection because their lives are at risk back home.
Perhaps the bigger threat to the way this place runs is the shifting mood of voters. If voters are prepared to vote in hardline populist governments that want a much firmer line on immigration, of course it's those kind of governments that are going to sit here, and they want a hard line on a variety of other issues as well.
And of course you do look to leaders to lead and point out where some of this is actually about racism, pure and simple. Sometimes we see migrants are much easily absorbed, displaced Ukrainians from the war there, when they look like the people in the country that they're going to, or they're from the same religion. So you do want leaders to point out when this is not politics, this is pure racism. Of course, there is a concern that more illiberal Democrats, leaders like Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary, are gaining advantage in this debate. And I think there's an effort by Merkel, by the European Council President Donald Tusk, to say no, the more traditional mainstream politicians can be tough about closing the borders, about enforcing the laws that exist, and at the same time comporting with international law and taking care of people who need protection.
The rules are complex. I hope I've managed to explain a little bit to our viewers about this difficulty between first arrival, where the asylum seekers arrive, and second arrival, them travelling within the Union to countries where they'd prefer to reside. You can't fix one without the other.
Right. I mean, Italy, of course, has long-standing concerns. It's a frontier country with coastline, migrants, refugees, asylum seekers come up on the shores all the time, right? You don't see as many parachuting into mainland Europe. So they've got a concern about primary arrivals, those first arrivals, and the burden that that places on the country where they land. And under international law and the EU's regulations, the country where they land is responsible for them. Italy wants to spread that burden around, and it has been quite an expensive burden, both in terms of money and in terms of bureaucracy. Now, then you have cases where, in some cases, not quite as many as the political rhetoric would make it sound, you have folks who register in one country and then move across, because there is this freedom of movement in the EU, move across the internal boundaries of the EU. They might be registered in Italy and show up in Germany, or registered in Italy and show up in Austria. And that's where the CSU is pushing back in Germany, saying, hey, we want to put a stop to that. Now, Merkel has gained some advantage by initially getting an agreement with President Macron of France, who says, okay, if you find someone registered in France and Germany and they need to be brought back, we will take them back. She's got some initial indications from Greece that they're also willing to do a deal. And so what we do see is the consensus is that in some cases you can't find consensus. And even if there isn't an all-EU agreement, individual countries amongst themselves may solve this political problem by saying, okay, we can enforce the laws in agreement with each other.
David Herzenhorn, thank you very much indeed. We will be here through the coming hours here on BBC World News to bring you all the latest from the summit. It's likely to go into the early hours of the morning, and there's going to be some fairly strong rhetoric you would expect from the 28 leaders who are gathering here. Yelda.
Christian, thank you so much. Now let's just bring you some breaking news that's just developed. That very anticipated meeting between President of Russia Vladimir Putin and his US counterpart Donald Trump is now going to be taking place in Helsinki on July the 16th. Now that announcement was made by the Kremlin. During the meeting they're expected to discuss bilateral relations and international issues, and of course this announcement comes just a day after President Putin met with US National Security Advisor John Bolton in Moscow. So that's the Russian President Vladimir Putin is going to meet Donald Trump in Helsinki on July the 16th. Now to the rest of the day's news. China's President Xi Jinping says he is committed to peace but will not give up even 1 inch of territory following talks with America's Defense Secretary in Beijing. Jim Mattis is the first Pentagon chief to visit China since 2014. The meeting comes as tensions continue to mount between the two countries over trade and China's claims to territory in the South China Sea. China's defense minister will visit the US later this year. A small plane has crashed into a construction site in a densely populated part of India's financial capital, Mumbai, killing 5 people, including 1 on the ground. Images broadcast on Indian news channels showed flames and black smoke billowing from the area, which sits right next to several high-rise residential towers. Now let's go to Thailand. It's now been 6 days and 5 nights since a group of teenagers and their football coach disappeared inside a cave in the north of the country. More rain and flooding means that the Thai Navy have had to give up trying to find a way deep inside. US and British experts have now arrived to help. Howard Johnson is in Chiang Rai, near the cave in the north of Thailand.
Search and rescue operations were hampered here this morning at the Tam Luang cave complex in northern Thailand because of heavy rain last night. What we saw was the water table inside the complex rise to its highest level since this emergency began 6 days ago. 13 missing people, 12 school children and their coach. This morning we spoke to the US team that are over here, the search and rescue guys, and they said that they were going over the top of the hill here to look to see if they could find a shaft or a chimney down into one of the chambers where the boys might be. We also saw the British team, a team of divers who left the complex. I asked them for a quote, but they declined to give one. Now this evening we've seen monks praying and giving offerings, hoping that the boys will be returned safely, and we're seeing more rescue teams going in, hoping to find the boys this evening.
That was Howard Johnson just outside that cave in the north of the country. Stay with us here on Impact. Still to come.
I'm live in Moscow at the World Cup as the final teams fight it out for a place in the last 16.
Welcome back. You're watching Impact. I'm Yalda Hakim. Donald Trump is visiting Wisconsin as he continues to criticize Harley-Davidson, the state's most famous business. Earlier this week, the motorcycling manufacturer announced it's moving jobs out of America because of tariffs introduced as part of the trade battle started by Mr. Trump. He's accused the company of waving the white flag. Chris Buckler has been speaking to Harley's workers about what side they're taking in the fight between the American president and the all-American brand.
Harley-Davidson has spent decades building an all-American image that's sold all over the world. But selling the distinctive roar of these engines has become an expensive rather than an easy ride. The company already has assembly plants in other countries, but Wisconsin is seen as the heart of Harley. And at this, its sprawling site in the state viewed as its home, workers are talking about tariffs. And there is a nervousness that some jobs could head off overseas.
I'm a little worried, but we'll just wait and see what's going to happen.
The tariffs imposed on Harley's exports to Europe are a result of the trade battle started by Donald Trump. But his supporters ending their shifts here don't seem to have lost faith in the president.
I feel great. I love my company. I like my president, and I'm happy. It's all good.
So you support them both?
Yep. I'm happy with Harley-Davidson and my president.
However, everyone in Wisconsin is aware that the president's policies could have an impact on Harley.
With Harley just over there, I mean, that must provide a lot of business for the area and for yourself too?
Yes, it does, and a lot of the businesses in this area.
Yet Trump voters are remaining loyal to the president.
He is what he is, bombastic, and I think he's controversial, but I think a lot of that is just part of the way he wants to negotiate and get things done.
It was in states like this that Donald Trump fired up his campaign. Turning Wisconsin Republican red was an important part of his presidential victory, and it's no surprise that he's back on the road campaigning here ahead of congressional elections. But the uncertainty about Harley-Davidson could hurt him.
Trump, as far as I'm concerned, I don't consider him America. He's our leader right now, but Harley-Davidson will always be America.
That sounds like a real warning to Donald Trump.
Don't mess with it.
There's no doubt Harley-Davidson is a classic American brand with more than a century of history. But it's the future success of this company that's important, not just to employees, but also President Trump. He could find his fortunes are linked to firms like Harley.
America First was welcomed as a positive message. But the road ahead has dangers if the president continues to push his protectionist policies. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Milwaukee.
Now it's day 15 of the World Cup with the last games in the group stage to be played. Japan is the only remaining Asian side in the tournament but has a good chance of progressing to the knockout phase. And of course, Regini is in Moscow for us to give us the very latest. Regini, high hopes from the Japanese fans.
Yes, but Yalda, I would be amiss if I didn't mention the fact that there are still a lot of German fans here reeling from the defending champions' shock exit from this World Cup. Although I did speak to some earlier who said we're still the champions for another 2 weeks. They are technically correct. But of course we have some important fixtures deciding who goes through to the final 16. So let's run through them. Well, Belgium play Germany. Play England, I'm sorry, that was a slip. England play Belgium to decide who the winner is in Group G. Both of those teams are already through. Panama play Tunisia in that group, but neither of those teams will be going through. Let's move on to Group H. In that, Colombia take on Senegal and Japan play Poland. Now, Poland aren't going to be going through, but everything is up for grabs for Colombia, Senegal and Japan. And some of these fans of the Blue Samurai that we spoke to hope that they will be the first Asian team to go through this year.
We thought before the match we will fail, but tomorrow we can go another stage. So we are so very excited and we have some confidence.
We definitely go to the next stage.
Yeah. We're gonna qualify.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Honda, he's playing really good so far. so he's definitely going to play tomorrow really well next as well.
And he's gonna score 1 for sure.
Maybe Kawashima. Oh.
Kawashima.
But no Lewandowski for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Japan!
Japan 3, Poland 1.
No way! No way!
Some hopeful Japan fans there. Well, as I mentioned earlier, England take on Belgium. Both of those teams are through, but there is a lot of expectation on how England will perform today after their stunning victory at the weekend. Our correspondent Sarah Rainsford is travelling with the England team. Sarah.
Well, yeah, as you were saying, a lot of expectation about this match. In fact, a lot of the fans we've been speaking to here specifically chose this game because they thought it would be the best match. In actual fact, both teams, the suggestion is that both teams actually prefer to go through the group stage in second place, giving them a more comfortable route through the World Cup. But still, the team saying that they're going to go out fighting, and the fans here certainly hoping that that's going to be the case. The crowds here have been building all day. I mean, Kaliningrad, this place, this part of Russia is really unusual. It's actually inside Europe, so fans have been coming here across the border from Poland on coaches. They've been chartering short flights here from London and from Belgium too. So fairly big numbers compared to what we've seen for England so far. At least 3,000, more than certainly came to the first game. And far more confident as an England crowd in particular, hanging their flags, singing, dancing and cheering, and now starting to dare to hope that England could actually do okay in this World Cup.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And fans from around the world gathering here in Moscow. I've just met two who've come here from Iraq. And I'm looking forward to watching that England game myself because it's incredibly humid out here in the heat in Moscow.
Regini, thank you so much for the latest there from the World Cup. Now, the pangolin is a mammal found in Asia and Africa, the world's most trafficked animal. Now, scientists say a new technique could help catch the poachers hunting the creature, as Angus Crawford reports.
So what we've got here are...
If you want to see something extraordinary, follow us. Behind this door, some of the rarest animals on the planet.
We've got hunting trophies, we've got skulls.
Killed to order and smuggled to be sold. But today we've come to see this, pangolin scales. They don't look like much, but they're worth a fortune.
It's all profit, because you're paying that little money to the person who poaches. So when they resell them to the end user, all of that money goes into the kingpin's pocket.
It's the most poached animal on Earth, the world's only scaly mammal. Its meat a delicacy. The scales, in their millions, used in Chinese traditional medicines. One animal is killed every 5 minutes. Police do their best, but lack the tools to identify the poachers. But these scales could offer hope. In a world first, British scientists have lifted human fingerprints off them. And here's how.
What I want you to do is to grip this.
A firm grip. A strip of sticky gelatin.
Moving the pangolin scale.
Peel it off.
And the print should be there.
Absolutely, just there.
Finally, into a scanner and...
straight down there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's the pangolin scale. And right in the middle of it, a great big thumbprint with all the ridges and detail.
Absolutely.
This is all unique to me. This couldn't be anyone else's.
This will be unique to you.
It can show the direct link between scale and poacher. The gelatin strips are cheap and easy to use by wildlife rangers in the field. Although the technology isn't new, this application is revolutionary. It's the first time it's ever been tried anywhere in the world. And scientists here hope that it could help identify the criminals behind this illegal trade. A high-tech breakthrough then, but will it be enough to save an animal already on the brink? Angus Crawford, BBC News.
Okay, let's just remind you of our breaking news this hour. The Russian President Vladimir Putin will be meeting his US counterpart Donald Trump in Helsinki on July the 16th. That was an announcement made by the Kremlin. This comes after Putin met with US National Security Advisor John Bolton a day ago in Moscow. We'll be back in 30 minutes' time. Football Focus next.